The sun had just begun its slow climb over the horizon, spilling a pale gold light across the open fields. The air was still cool, and a thin layer of mist clung to the soil, that quiet hour before the world truly wakes. And there he was, William, bent, weathered, yet unbroken. The years had carved their story upon his face. Deep lines, sun-darkened skin, eyes that had seen too much and still hoped for something more. He gripped the wooden handle of his hoe, the same one he'd used for decades. Its smooth, worn surface had shaped itself to his hands over the years, like an old friend that never left, even when the rest of life did. The earth beneath his boots felt heavy with dew. The smell of soil, damp and alive, filled the air, a scent that had been both his curse and his comfort for more than 40 years. For a moment, William stopped working. He straightened his back slowly, bones creaking in protest, and looked toward the far horizon where the sky kissed the fields in a soft haze of light. That horizon, that endless, unreachable line, had once been his dream. When he was young, he had promised himself that one day he would walk beyond it. Back then, William was full of spirit, a restless boy with wide eyes and a pocket full of wild hopes. He wanted to travel, to build, to live beyond the limits of his father's land. He dreamed of doing something that mattered, but dreams, he'd learned, are fragile things. They don't die suddenly. They fade slowly, quietly, one compromise at a time. His father used to say, "A man's worth isn't in what he dreams, boy. It's in what he endures." At 20, William thought those words were harsh, almost cruel. At 65, they felt like truth carved into his soul. He had endured storms that washed away crops, debts that nearly broke him, and years where hope was as thin as the bread on the table. But he'd never stopped working, because hunger, he knew, didn't wait for dreamers. As he stared into the distance, his mind wandered to the past, to his youth, when life was loud with laughter and promise. He remembered the small church fair where he'd first seen Mary, standing under the oak tree with a basket of flowers. Her eyes were warm, and when she smiled, he felt like the whole world paused to take a breath. He fell in love before he even realized it. Mary was the one who made him believe that love could grow in the hardest soil. He still remembered the day they married, the church bells, the nervous laugh, the way her hand trembled slightly as they promised to face life together. And they did, through every harvest, every storm, every hungry season. But life, William thought, has a strange way of testing love. As the years went on, their laughter became rarer. The days grew longer, the nights quieter. They stopped dreaming of more and started praying for just enough. Their children grew up watching him in those fields. He wanted to show them that hard work could change a man's fate. But somewhere deep inside, he feared he had only taught them how to survive, not how to live. William sighed and leaned on his hoe. He looked down at his hands, cracked, rough, calloused. These hands had built, fed, carried, and comforted, but they had also forgotten how to rest. Sometimes at night he would lie awake and wonder, was this all there was? A life of sweat and soil, of feeding others while starving his own dreams? The thought stung, yet it came back every dawn like an unwelcome visitor. Still, he would rise, tie his boots, and return to the fields. Because that's what men like him did. They kept going. A soft breeze stirred the wheat around him, brushing against his face like a familiar whisper. He closed his eyes for a moment, and in that quiet he could almost hear the echo of his younger self. The boy who once stood at this very edge of the field and promised, "Someday I'll leave this place." He smiled faintly at the memory. That boy was gone now, replaced by a man who had done everything he could to protect his family, and in doing so had forgotten the dream that started it all. Still, deep inside, a flicker remained, small, fragile, but alive. He looked toward the distant hill where the sun was now climbing higher, bathing everything in a warm golden glow. And for the first time in years, William whispered softly under his breath, as if testing the words, "Maybe it's not too late." The thought surprised him. It was foolish, he knew. A man his age didn't start over, not in this world. But still, that whisper didn't fade. It grew louder, bolder, until it felt like the wind itself was carrying it across the fields. Maybe he couldn't change the past, but perhaps there was still something left to change in the time he had. a purpose he'd yet to find. The distant sound of a crow broke his thoughts. He turned toward the small wooden hut standing near the end of the path, his home, weathered by sun and rain, but still standing just like him. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Mary was probably making breakfast, maybe corn porridge, maybe bread if the flour lasted. William smiled again, softer this time. For all the years and losses, her presence was still the one thing that steadied him. He took a slow breath and lifted his hoe again. The day was waiting, and so was his life, unchanged, unrelenting. But as he took the first step back toward the hut, something new stirred in his heart. A quiet restlessness he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what it meant yet, or where it would lead, but something was coming, something that would make him face the truth he had avoided for a lifetime. And as the wind picked up again, rustling through the fields, William felt it deep in his bones. This season would not be like the rest. The morning breeze carried the smell of freshly baked bread from the small hut at the edge of the field. William paused by the door, wiping the sweat from his brow, even though the day had barely begun. The sun had risen higher now, warm and unforgiving, burning to the last traces of mist. He stood for a moment before going in, not because he was tired, but because he knew what awaited inside. The same quiet conversation, the same worried eyes of a woman who had held this family together while he wrestled with the world outside. He stepped into the kitchen. Mary stood near the stove, her gray hair tied loosely, her hands dusted with flour. The softness of fire and the faint crackle of bread crust filled the silence between them. "Morning," William said gently. Mary glanced over her shoulder, offering a faint smile. "Morning. You were out early again." He nodded, hanging his hat by the door. "Couldn't sleep much." She said nothing, just turned the bread on the skillet. The smell filled the small room, comforting but heavy with something unspoken. At the table sat John, their grown son. His sleeves were rolled up, arms strong from work, but his face held the same tiredness William saw every time he looked in the mirror. He was staring at the cup in front of him, lost in thought. "Morning, son," William said, taking a seat. John lifted his eyes briefly. "Morning, Pa." It should have been a peaceful morning, but there was tension, that quiet, familiar kind that had settled into their home like dust. Mary placed a loaf of bread on the table. "It's not much," she murmured, "but it's warm." William reached for it, tearing off a piece. The bread was rough, unevenly baked, but it smelled like love and struggle, the kind of food made not for pleasure, but for survival. He chewed slowly, then said, "We'll need to head out to the east field today. The soil's drying too fast. If we don't dig the trenches, we'll lose half the crop." John didn't look up. "The tools are breaking, Pa. We can't keep patching them forever." William frowned. "We've managed before. We'll manage again." John sighed. "That's what you always say." Mary's hand stilled. The sound of the crackling fire was suddenly too loud. William set his bread down, his jaw tightening. "You got something to say, boy?" John hesitated, then looked up, eyes burning with the kind of frustration that only grows in silence. "Yeah, I do. I'm tired of just managing. We've been surviving our whole lives, Pa." "For what?" William's chest tightened. "For a family. For food on the table. For you and your sister to have something." John shook his head. "We don't have anything, Pa. We've got a roof that leaks, land that's dying, and debts that never go away." Mary whispered softly, "John," but the fire had already caught. William stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "You think I haven't given enough? You think I wanted this life?" His voice cracked, not with anger, but with years of swallowed pain. "I worked this land so you wouldn't go hungry. I broke my back so you could have a chance I never did." John stood too. "And what chance is that, Pa? To end up like you? Worn out before 60, living in the same four walls, dreaming of a life that never came?" The room went silent. Only the sound of the wind brushing against the wooden walls filled the space between them. Mary's eyes glistened. She whispered, "Enough, both of you." But William couldn't move. He stared at his son, seeing not defiance, but the reflection of the same fire he once had, the same restless hunger that time had beaten out of him. Finally, William's shoulders dropped. His voice softened. You don't understand yet, John. Life doesn't give you what you dream. It gives you what you fight to keep. John looked away, jaw tight, eyes wet with unspoken words. Mary broke the silence again, her tone gentle. There's still work to be done. You can fight each other, or you can fight the soil. Choose. Her words, though quiet, carried the weight of decades. John left the table without another word, stepping outside into the bright, unforgiving sun. William sank back into his chair, rubbing his temples. Mary poured him a cup of tea, her hand trembling slightly. He's young, Will. He doesn't see what you see yet. I know, William whispered, but it hurts just the same. They sat in silence for a while. The bread cooled, uneaten. The ticking of the old wall clock was the only sound left between them. Finally, Mary reached across the table, resting her hand on his. You've carried too much for too long. Let the boy take some of it. You can't bear every burden alone. William looked down at her hand. Thin, delicate. The same hand that had once wiped the sweat from his brow when they were young and full of hope. Now it trembled from age, but its warmth hadn't changed. I don't know how to stop, he said quietly. Mary smiled faintly. Then maybe that's what needs a change. Her words lingered. They were simple, yet they pierced through him deeper than she knew. He looked out the window toward the east field, where his son now stood by the fence, hands on his hips, staring into the same endless horizon William once dreamed of crossing. Maybe this was how life came full circle. One man growing old as another searched for his beginning. William took a deep breath, feeling the ache in his chest and the sting behind his eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he felt something shifting, slowly, quietly, like the first crack in a wall that had stood too long. The weight of bread, he realized, wasn't just in the hunger it filled. It was in the price a man paid to earn it. Outside, the sun burned brighter, casting sharp shadows across the field. And somewhere deep within him, William felt that this day, this small, ordinary morning, was the start of something that would change everything. He couldn't explain it, but as he watched his son walk farther into the light, William felt the old wind rise again, whispering softly across the land, as if fate itself had begun to stir. The sun had climbed high over the fields by the time William returned to work. The morning's argument with John still echoed in his mind, sharp, painful words he wished he could take back, yet somehow couldn't. The soil felt dry beneath his boots. The hoe dug into the earth with a dull thud. Each strike was heavy, slower than the one before. He could feel the ache in his shoulders, the stiffness in his back, signs of a body that carried too much for too long. The world around him was quiet, almost painfully so. No birds, no laughter, just the steady rhythm of his own labor. And in that silence, William found himself listening to the thoughts he had tried to bury for years. Maybe John was right. Maybe they had been surviving, not living. He looked up at the horizon, the same horizon that once made his heart beat faster. But now, it felt distant, unreachable, like a memory fading at the edges. The fields stretched wide and golden before him, yet they seemed emptier than ever. Once, this land had been a promise. Now, it felt like a mirror reflecting back all his sacrifices, all the years he'd traded for a roof, a loaf of bread, and the hope that would be enough. He drove the hoe into the dirt again, harder this time, as if he could silence the thoughts by force. The sound of the blade striking stone sent a sharp pain up his arms. He stopped, catching his breath. From a distance, he saw John working near the far fence line, his movements fast, almost angry. The boy's strength was undeniable. His youth burned with the same stubborn fire William once had, but that fire could destroy as easily as it could build. William watched him for a while, the sweat glistening on his son's neck, the tension in his shoulders. He wanted to walk over, to say something, anything, but pride rooted him where he stood. The silence between them stretched like an empty field, and neither knew how to cross it. He thought of Mary, how she had stood between them that morning, her voice trembling, her hands trying to hold together two worlds that were quietly breaking apart. She didn't deserve this. The fighting, the worry, the weight of two stubborn men pulling in different directions. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of dry earth and wheat. The sun was harsh now, beating down like judgment. William pulled his hat lower and kept working, each movement slower, more deliberate, as if he were digging through time itself. By midday, his shirt was soaked through and his hands were raw. He set the hoe aside and sat on a rock near the edge of the field. From there, he could see everything. The small hut, the smoke curling faintly from its chimney, the broken fence posts leaning toward the wind, and beyond it all, the horizon shimmering under the heat. It was beautiful in a lonely sort of way. This land had taken so much, yet it still stood loyal, waiting for giving. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph, Mary, years ago, holding their 2 children, her hair darker than, her smile soft and full of hope. He remembered that day clearly. It was after a good harvest, one of the few. They had laughed, sung songs, and promised each other that better days were coming. He turned the photo over and saw the faint writing on the back, in her handwriting, "For the days we'll never forget." A faint smile touched his lips, but it quickly faded. There were too many days he had forgotten, not because he wanted to, but because life demanded it. He looked back at John. The boy had stopped working, now standing by the fence with his back to him. For a long moment neither moved. Then John leaned on the fence post, wiping his brow, and glanced in William's direction. Their eyes met. It wasn't anger anymore, just weariness. A silent understanding passed between them. William gave a small nod. John hesitated, then nodded back before turning again to his work. It wasn't peace, but it was something, the smallest crack of light in a long, dark hallway. The day dragged on until the sky began to change. The golden light softened, the shadows stretched longer, and the air cooled. William stood, dusted off his hands, and began the slow walk home. As he reached the edge of the field, he saw Mary waiting by the porch, her hands clasped together, her face soft but concerned. He smiled faintly. "You didn't have to wait," he said. "I always wait," she replied, a gentle firmness in her tone. He climbed the steps, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on his bones. She handed him a cup of water. He drank deeply, the cool liquid easing his dry throat. "You two worked hard today," she said softly. William nodded. "The boy's strong." "He's your son," she replied with a small smile. He looked out at the fading light. "He's also got my stubbornness. That's not always a gift." Mary chuckled quietly. "No, but it's the reason we've made it this far." He turned to her, his voice low. "Mary, what if I've been wrong all these years? What if working harder isn't the same as living better?" She didn't answer right away. She looked out toward the field, her eyes thoughtful. "Maybe it's not about being wrong," she said. "Maybe it's just time to learn something new." The words lingered in the air like a gentle prayer. As darkness settled, William sat on the porch steps, watching the last light fade from the horizon. The fields were quiet now, the kind of silence that spoke more than words ever could. He could hear the soft rustle of wheat in the wind, the chirping of crickets beginning their night song, and the faint laughter of his grandchildren from inside the house. For the first time in a long while, he felt the pull of something different. Not duty, not fear, but a longing to understand what he had missed all these years. He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would bring something that would test him once again. Not through hardship, but through choice. And this time, it wouldn't be the field that challenged him, it would be his heart. The night came quietly, as it always did in the countryside, without fanfare, without sound, just the soft hum of crickets and the whisper of wind through the wheat. William sat alone by the old fireplace, the flames throwing a faint, flickering glow across his lined face. The others had gone to bed. The house was silent now, except for the occasional creak of old wood settling. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted a chipped cup of tea. The warmth soothed his palms, but inside, a different kind of cold was spreading, one that no fire could chase away. On the wall beside him hung a small, cracked mirror. It had been there for years, a wedding gift from Mary's parents, long before the wrinkles, before the gray, before the endless labor that carved his youth away. Tonight, the mirror caught his attention. For a long moment, he just stared. The reflection staring back at him didn't seem like him anymore. The man in the mirror was old, tired, with eyes that had seen too much and spoken too little. His beard was coarse and white, his shoulders heavy with invisible weights. He leaned closer. "Is this what I become?" he whispered softly. His voice broke in stillness. "Just a man who worked and forgot to live?" The words hung in the air. From the bedroom, he could hear Mary's faint breathing. Steady, gentle, the rhythm of a woman who had carried a family through storms. He thought of their younger days, how her laughter once filled the same house, how she'd sing while cooking, how her eyes used to shine when they talked about dreams. But dreams fade. Life happens. Bills, sickness, growing children, failing harvests. They came one after another until even hope learned to be quiet. He turned away, but the mirror caught a glint, a reflection of the framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was their wedding picture, edges faded, corners curling. William rose slowly and took it down. The image showed two bright faces full of promise. A young man in a simple suit, a young woman with flowers in her hair. For the first time in years, William smiled, and it hurt. He walked to the window and looked out over the fields. Moonlight lay over the land like silver silk, stretching across the wheat. This soil had been his companion, his enemy, his reason for waking up every morning. He'd given it everything, his back, his hands, his youth. But now he wondered, had it given anything back? Suddenly, a soft knock came at the door. It was John. The boy hesitated at the doorway, unsure if his father wanted company. "Can't sleep?" John muttered. "Thought I'd check the fire." William nodded, pretending not to notice the nervousness in his son's tone. "Sit down," he said quietly. John sat across from him, the firelight flickering between them like a living thing, warm, fragile, and uncertain. "Dad," the boy said after a pause, "you ever regret staying here? On the farm, I mean?" William didn't answer right away. He stared at the fire, remembering countless nights just like this, nights where dreams and hunger fought quietly inside him. "Every man regrets something, son," he said finally. "But regret's like a seed. You plant too many, and soon there's no room left to grow anything else." John nodded, looking down at his hands. I don't want to end up like..." He stopped himself. "Like me?" William finished the sentence for him. John's silence was answer enough. The fire cracked. Outside, a lonely owl called from the trees. The night felt heavier now, full of words they'd never said. William leaned back, eyes distant. "You won't," he said quietly. "You'll have your chance. You'll see the world. Just don't forget where you came from. Don't forget us." There was no anger in his tone, just a deep, aching sadness. John looked up, surprised. "You mean that?" William smiled faintly. "You think I want you to fight the same fights I did? No, son. I worked this land so you wouldn't have to." The boy swallowed hard. "But you love this land." "I did," William said softly. "I still do. But sometimes love means letting go, even of what we built with our own hands." A long silence followed, the kind that speaks louder than words. Finally, John stood, emotion thick in his throat. "Good night, Dad," he whispered, as the door closed behind him. William looked once more at the mirror. The cracked glass seemed to shimmer in the firelight, one reflection, split into pieces. The man he was, the man he could have been, the man he still hoped to be. He raised a trembling hand and touched the crack with his fingertip. The glass was cold. "Maybe it's not too late," he murmured. "Maybe..." Outside, the wind stirred again, brushing against the window pane like a whisper of the past. William sat back, eyes heavy but heart awake for the first time in years. Tomorrow, he thought, he would walk to the far side of the field, the one he hadn't touched in years. He would start something new, even if his hands shook and his knees ached, because somewhere inside him, the boy in the photograph was still alive, waiting to dream again. And as the fire burned low, the old mirror reflected not just the man he had become, but the faint, fragile light of hope returning. The morning sun rose pale and cold, spreading its first light across the land like a blessing and a reminder. The wheat shimmered faintly with dew, and the air carried that strange silence that comes after an emotional storm. Not sadness, not peace, but something between the two. William stepped outside, pulling his worn coat close. His back ached, as it always did, but today the pain didn't matter. He was going to the far side of the field, the part he hadn't touched in years. That patch of land had always felt different to him. It was where he'd once planned to build something. Maybe a new barn, maybe a home for John someday. But life had swallowed those plans whole. Harvest after harvest, loss after loss, until that piece of earth became a quiet graveyard for his forgotten dreams. As he walked, the wheat brushed gently against his legs, whispering in the wind like an old friend. The sun climbed higher, casting long, golden rays that stretched across the horizon. When he reached the far edge, he stopped. The soil that was hard, untouched, and covered with weeds. He sighed, kneeling slowly. The air smelled of earth and memory. And then he saw it, half buried beneath a flat stone. Something white caught his eye. A corner of old paper, browned by years of dust and rain. He reached for it carefully, his rough hands trembling. The paper was stiff, edges torn, but still legible. On the front, written in faded ink, was his name. To William. He stared for a long moment, unsure if his mind was playing tricks. Then he opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Mary's, but the date, it was from years ago. My dear William, if you are reading this, it means time has passed, and I could not say the words aloud. I know how much this land means to you, but I fear it has taken more from you than it has given. I have watched you fight the storms, the droughts, the endless struggle, and somewhere in all that, I saw the man I love begin to disappear. I wish you would remember the boy who once dreamed beyond these fields. I wish you'd laugh again, sing again, rest again. You've carried so much alone, and I've been too afraid to tell you that it's all right to stop fighting sometimes. It's all right to live. When you find this letter, I hope you'll forgive yourself. You've given everything, William, to me, to the children, to this land. That is enough. It has always been enough. With love, Mary. William's eyes blurred as he finished reading. His hands shook so badly that he nearly dropped the paper. He looked around at the empty field, the sun now bright above, the wind swaying the wheat like a golden sea. He felt her presence everywhere, in the air, in the silence, in the letter's gentle truth. All those years he thought he was fighting alone, but she had been beside him, seeing, knowing, loving. A tear rolled down his cheek, and then another. He hadn't cried in years. Not since his parents' passing, not since the drought that nearly broke them. But now, the tears came freely, like rain on dry soil. He sat there for a long time, the letter in his lap, eyes lost in the horizon, and for the first time in decades, he didn't feel burdened. He felt seen. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Dad! It was John. He had followed quietly, worried after seeing his father leave before dawn. William quickly wiped his eyes and smiled faintly. Morning, son. John glanced at the paper. What's that? A letter, William said softly. From your mother. John knelt beside him, surprise flickering in his eyes. Mom? But she... Yes, William nodded. She wrote it long ago. Guess it waited for the right day to be found. They sat there together in silence, the letter resting between them. The wind played gently with the edges of the paper. After a while, John said quietly, She was right, you know, about you needing rest. William chuckled softly, the sound weak but real. I think I finally understand what she meant. John looked at him, a hint of worry and affection mingling his eyes. You okay, Dad? William nodded, gazing at the sky. For the first time in a long while, I think I am. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of forgiveness, of love, of all the words that had waited too long to be spoken. The wind carried the smell of soil and sunlight. Somewhere a bird began to sing, just one, its clear voice cutting through the quiet. William folded the letter carefully, holding it against his chest. Let's go home, he said. We've still got work to do, but maybe this time we'll do it a little differently. John helped him stand. Together, they walked back to the field, father and son side by side, their shadows long and golden across the wheat. The letter rustled softly in William's pocket, like a heartbeat reminding him that life, no matter how worn or weary, still had moments left to cherish. That night, the air felt strange, heavy and alive, like the sky itself was holding its breath. The horizon, usually calm and endless, was now swallowed by thick, dark clouds rolling in from the west. The wind came first, slow, then fierce, rattling the old windows and bending the trees until they groaned. William stood by the door, watching. His hands rested on the wooden frame, his mind far away. It had been years since he'd seen a storm this fierce, maybe decades. Behind him, Mary's old lamp flickered softly on the table beside the folded letter. He had placed it there after showing it to John, unable to put away. That piece of paper had changed something deep inside him. Reopened a door he thought was locked forever. Now, as thunder rolled across the sky, he felt that same door trembling again, not from fear, but from something else. Anticipation. John entered, his shirt damp from checking the livestock. "It's coming fast," he said, wiping his brow. "You should get some rest, Dad." William shook his head slowly. "Not yet. The east fence won't hold if the wind turns. I'll go check it." John frowned. "I already checked it. It's fine." But William's eyes were far away, fixed on something deeper than fences or fields. "Maybe so," he said, "but I've lived through enough storms to know you never trust a calm before it hits." The boy sighed, familiar with that stubborn tone. "All right," he muttered. "I'll come with you." They stepped out together into the night. The wind tugged at their clothes, and rain began to fall, first soft, then sharp and relentless. The field shimmered under flashes of lightning, each bolt turning the wheat into waves of silver fire. They reached the fence line, struggling to see through the rain. William leaned on the post, testing it with his weight. "Still strong," he said over the wind. John turned to him, voice raised. "Then let's go back. It's not safe out here." But before William could answer, lightning tore through the sky again, and he saw something move near the far corner of the field. One of the younger cows had broken free, tangled near the edge of the ditch. William didn't think. He just moved. "Dad, wait." The rain came harder, stinging like needles. The old man's boot sank deep into the mud as he pushed forward. The cow struggled, frightened by the thunder. Its rope caught around a wooden post. "Easy, girl," William said softly, his voice barely a whisper against the roar of wind. He worked at the knot, his hands shaking, the rain blurring his vision. John reached him seconds later, grabbing his arm. "Dad, we can come back when it clears." "No," William snapped, pulling free. "This field, this land, it's all we've got. I won't lose it again." For a moment, John saw something raw in his father's eyes, not just fear, but years of pain, pride, and unyielding love. Then came the sound, a crack like the sky breaking open. The post snapped under the weight of the storm, and William stumbled backward. John caught him just in time, both falling into wet earth. The cow broke free and ran into the open field, but neither of them cared. The storm was relentless now, pouring down in furious sheets. "Dad!" John shouted over the wind. "We need to go." William tried to push himself up, coughing hard. His chest burned. "Go ahead," he gasped. "I just need a second." John froze, fear flashing across his face. "No, I'm not leaving you." William's hand gripped his son's arm. His breath came ragged, shallow. "You remember what your mother wrote?" he whispered. "She said it's all right to stop fighting." John's heart pounded. "Don't say that." But William's voice grew softer, almost peaceful. "Son, I've been fighting all my life, the storms, the land, myself. Maybe it's time I rest." Thunder rolled above them like a farewell. John pulled his father close, shielding him from the rain. "You're going to be fine," he said, though his voice trembled. "You just need to hold on." William's eyes, tired but calm, lifted toward the horizon, a faint line of pale light breaking through the clouds. Dawn was coming. "Look," he whispered. "She's here." John followed his gaze. For a brief, breathtaking moment, the storm parted and soft sunlight spilled through, washing over the field like grace itself. William smiled faintly. "Tell her I finally stopped fighting." And with that, he exhaled one last gentle breath, his body going still in his son's arms as the storm's fury began to fade. John sat there long after the thunder moved away, holding his father close, the rain mingling with his tears. The dawn spread slowly across the sky, golden and endless, just as his father had always dreamed. When he finally stood, he looked out across the field, the land his father had given everything to. The wheat shone in the newborn light, bending softly in the wind, whispering a language John suddenly understood. It wasn't about the land. It was about love, endurance, and a man who gave his life so another could live freely. John turned toward the farmhouse, his father's hat in his hand, the letter safe in his pocket. The sun climbed higher, and the storm was gone, leaving only the sound of birds and the breath of the earth beginning again. The morning after the storm was quiet, almost sacred. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of damp earth. The golden wheat shimmered under the pale light of dawn, bending slightly as if bowing to honor the man who had given his life to the soil. John stood in the middle of the field, his boots sinking softly into the wet ground. The wind moved gently through the wheat, whispering like a voice he knew too well. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. His father's presence was everywhere, in the rhythm of the earth, in the warmth of the rising sun, in the stillness that followed the storm. He looked down at the small cross he had made, a simple wooden marker near the place where his father had fallen. He knelt, brushing the soil with his hand, and placed the old hat William used to wear upon the cross. The edges of it were torn and faded, just like the man who had worn it through decades of struggle. "Pa!" he whispered, his voice trembling. "You did it. You kept your promise, even when the world turned against you." Tears slid down his face, not of sorrow this time, but of understanding. For all his life, John had watched his father fight, against the land, against time, against hunger, and sometimes even against himself. But now, he saw what his father had truly been fighting for them, for the family, for dignity, for the belief that life, no matter how cruel, still held meaning when you faced it with courage. He stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon. The clouds were clearing, and the world seemed reborn. In the distance, the old farmhouse stood bathed in soft light, a place that had once been filled with arguments and silence, now holding only memories. John walked back, each step heavy yet certain. As he entered the house, everything was as his father had left it. The Bible on the wooden table, the old coat by the door, the framed photograph of their mother smiling softly. He sat in the same chair William used to sit in and opened the letter his father had found in the field, the one from his late wife, written years ago. Her handwriting was faint but graceful. "My dear William, if this letter ever finds you, remember that love is not measured in what we gain, but in what we give. Do not be afraid of what you've lost. The harvest of your life will not be in the fields, but in the hearts you've touched." John's eyes blurred as he folded the paper back with trembling hands. He looked around the house, and in that quiet he felt them both near, his father and mother, together again, watching over him. As weeks passed, John stayed and worked the same land. But unlike his father, he did not let the burden crush him. He worked with love, not fear. He smiled at the sunrise, spoke kindly to the neighbors, and shared the crops with families who needed them most. People in a nearby town began to notice him, the man who had once left, who came back to heal what was broken. They said he worked like his father, but carried something different in his heart. Peace. Every evening, he would sit by the field with his father's hat beside him. The sky would turn shades of amber and rose, and he would whisper stories into the wind of his childhood, his mistakes, his hopes for tomorrow. And when the breeze brushed past his face, he knew the wind carried his words home. Years later, when his hair had turned silver and his hands bore the same lines as his father's, John stood once more in that golden field. The land had changed, the house older, but the spirit of the place was alive. He closed his eyes and listened, the whispering wheat, the hum of life continuing, and somewhere in that sound, his father's deep voice, proud and gentle. "You did well, son. You carried the name with honor." John smiled softly, lifting his face toward the sky. The wind moved through the wheat like music, and he felt again peace, belonging, and the quiet joy of a life lived for love. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the land in gold and crimson. John placed the old hat back on the cross one final time, his voice breaking as he said, "Rest easy, Pa, it's harvest time." As the camera would slowly fade out, the sound of the wind carries a final message. That life, no matter how hard, finds its meaning in love, sacrifice, and faith that endures beyond time. In the end, life is not measured by the things we earn, but by the love we leave behind. William spent his years fighting storms, chasing dreams, and carrying burdens heavier than his body could bear. But even when his hands trembled and his heart grew tired, he never stopped giving. His story reminds us that every wrinkle carries a story of courage, every scar a lesson of faith. And though time took his youth, it could never take his spirit, because what we build with love never truly fades. His son, John, learned that the greatest inheritance isn't land or gold or name, it's the strength to keep going, even when life falls apart. So when the storms of your life come, remember this: the harvest of your soul is not found in what you gain, but in what you give